be able to allow the body to be relaxed but upright, and the mind to be tranquil but alert. Tranquil and alert and present. So the Buddha's instructions for mindfulness of in and out breathing are the most detailed meditation instructions he offers. And we'll work with a number of them. We'll see how far we get. But it begins with bringing mindfulness to the fore, or establishing mindfulness, and placing our attention on our breathing. Aware that we're breathing in when we're breathing in, and aware that we're breathing out when we're breathing out. And in the first two instructions, the Buddha asks us to be aware of the length of the breath. Breathing in long or short, breathing out long or short. And this is really a mechanism for establishing mindfulness on the breath. So not only are we breathing, we're aware that we're breathing, we are inquiring about the breath, we're observing the breath. And notice how it feels. If it brings tension, then make a conscious effort to relax. And just observe the breath being natural. Letting go of any other concerns. Just being present. We don't have to do anything special. Just being aware. This is an in-breath. This is an out-breath. Now, with any of these instructions or steps, when we're doing it on our own, we might take as much time as we can, as we wish, as feels comfortable or appropriate. But today we'll walk through them a little more quickly. So we're breathing in, breathing out. And then the Buddha invites us to put our attention on our whole body. Now, what it means to open the focus, to take in the whole body. I find it helpful to think of it in the energetic sense, that this body has energy in and around it. And we're just becoming aware of the whole thing. We still feel the in-breath, feel the out-breath. We're aware that we're breathing in when we're breathing in, and we're aware that we're breathing out when we're breathing out. And we're experiencing the whole body. And as we do, we might notice particular areas of tightness. And we can put a little extra attention there and allow that or invite that area to relax. We can also intentionally bring an attitude of kindness towards the body, a wish for well-being, softening, and still staying aware and alert. Breathing in, breathing out. The breath is an anchor. It keeps us centered and grounded, connected to our spiritual energy. And the breath is that layer, you might say, between the physical and the energetic, or the physical and the spiritual. We can use the breath to calm the body, or we can use the breath to bring more alertness. If we focus on the in-breath, then we can bring in more energy, brighten the mind, brighten our awareness. But if we are in need of letting go more, relaxing, calming down, reducing restlessness, then we can put the bulk of our attention on the out-breath to let go. And right now, during this phase, letting go of tension in the body, and also inviting the whole body to become more tranquil, and for the bodily processes to become more calm. And in the next instruction, the Buddha invites us to become aware of feeling. And this is feeling that arises in the body. We experience it through the body. But the Buddha asks us to be sensitive to piti, to that spiritual energy that is a mental quality, a mental happiness, or a mental feeling of pleasure. But it's unworldly pleasure, spiritual pleasure. And as the body and mind become more calm, and we're mindful and present, there's a certain pleasure that comes with that. And we can be sensitive to signs that we're connecting in more deeply to that spiritual energy, that spiritual pleasant feeling. It could present itself in the body as warmth or tingling, just a feeling of mild feelings of joy or even strong feelings of joy. We might notice feeling that's very subtle, pleasant, happy, contented. And by placing our awareness there, bringing our attention to those feelings, it helps them expand and develop. We're still aware that we're breathing in when we're breathing in, and breathing out when we're breathing out, and aware of pleasant feeling. Tingling or warmth or fullness. Or how does it appear for you when you have the sense that you're tuning in to stillness, to spiritual happiness? Sometimes it can be that soft, subtle sound in the ears, sometimes called the sound of silence. This is another indication or fullness. These are all considered to be PT. And PT is very close relative, Sukha, a bit softer, pleasant feeling. These two often are experienced together. There's no real definite distinction between them. The Buddha asks us to be aware of them. And to whatever degree we feel pleasure or happiness in the body. And the Buddha then invites us to bring our attention to the activity of the mind, and the chitta sankhara, and invite the activity of the mind to become calm. So we will have some level of tranquility in the body, and tranquility in the mind. And then while we're still aware of each in breath and each out breath, we turn our attention to the mind itself rather than the activity, observing more what I think of as the mood of the mind or the field of the mind. Noticing whether or not it's happy, content, or restless, dull. And at this point, the Buddha encourages us to gladden the mind, to bring up brightness and happiness in the mind. And we each find our own way of doing that, perhaps a different way at different times. But some of the possibilities could be to reflect upon the Buddha and his wonderful qualities, or the Dhamma, or the enlightened Sangha, or to reflect on your own generosity and goodness, your own virtue, or the inspiration of the Devas and their support. These 6 reflections were encouraged by the Buddha, and they suit this task that we have at this moment of gladdening the mind, lifting up the mind. As the Buddha often said, that the happy mind is easily concentrated. So we gladden the mind and then let go into peacefulness to whatever degree that's available at this moment. A lucid calm, a stillness, resting there, alert and aware of the in-breath and the out-breath. Well, it's very nice to meet all of you and to see you all coming together from many corners of oh, not even just the Western Hemisphere, the world. It's amazing how we can come together like this. And the most amazing part of it is coming together in the Dhamma, isn't it? So you have probably all been involved in this series of the Noble Eightfold Path. And today our focus is on mindfulness, on samasati. Right mindfulness is often the way it's translated. And you probably, like most people in the world, have heard a lot about mindfulness. I would imagine as practitioners of the Dhamma, you've probably, learned quite a lot about the four foundations of mindfulness, because that's really the way the Buddha described right mindfulness, sama mindfulness. And as you know, our meditation this morning, covering rather quickly the first three sections of anapanasati, mindfulness of in and out breathing. And so the first three sections, there are four sections altogether, or four tetrads, as each one has four instructions in it. And we were, going through the first 12. I hope it was useful. It's hard to do that as a guided meditation because it's really great if you can spend the time that you need on each part. And they don't always have to be taken in order. After they're learned, you might find that different instructions are needed at different times, going back and forth. Anapanasati is the first meditation the Buddha mentions in the four foundations of mindfulness. It's related to the body. But in those four tetrads, they actually cover all of the foundations, because they move from the first one is about the body, the second tetrad is about feeling, the third one, the mind, the citta, and the fourth one, Dhamma. And that's the way the four foundations of mindfulness are set up. The Buddha has quite an array of meditations and techniques in the first foundation for the body. And the one on feeling, really being present and aware of our feelings, and noticing their whether they're worldly or unworldly, pleasant, painful, or neutral, primarily. And then the attention paid to the mind in the foundation of mindfulness based on citta, mind. It's really investigating the mood of the mind or the state of the mind, and knowing whether it's affected by greed, hatred, or delusion, whether it's contracted or expanded, and there's a list there of what we might experience happening in the mind. And then, of course, Dhamma, various kinds of reflections on aspects of the doctrine of Buddhism, on the reality, the truth of the way things are. And some of them that are listed are exploring the five hindrances, the six sense spaces, the aggregates. And you can go into the seven enlightenment factors, the four noble truths, themselves, and so on. But I think an important aspect of looking at right mindfulness is to look at how essential it is that it's placed in the context of the rest of what the Buddha taught. So nowadays there are so many books written about mindfulness and programs available about mindfulness, and we're starting to see some studies and some writings about some of the negative effects that people might experience in working with mindfulness. So I was reading an article recently that showed up in The Guardian about some of the things that happen to people when their company is requiring them to have these mindfulness classes, and finding that they can trigger anxiety, depression, the kind of lapsing into triggering trauma or post-traumatic stress. And this is from the perspective of the monastics that I know. This is primarily due to taking mindfulness out of the context of the Dhamma and using it for purposes other than what the Buddha intended. So the purpose of this whole Noble Eightfold Path is to awaken. And having awakening, enlightenment, the realization of Nibbana held as the guiding star that we're moving towards, this makes it possible for all of the other beautiful qualities like virtue and kindness and the other Brahma Viharas and the development of the heart, such that we're truly loving and forgiving, kind and harmless, patient, and all of these qualities that are, you might say, developed as we become more mature in the practice, more mature in our life. This is all part of the whole package, you might say. Developing generosity. This is all context for something like mindfulness. And so there's something really missing when we're just looking at mindfulness as a technique to achieve a lesser goal, like there are literally hundreds of books talking about, being more productive at work, or I've heard being mindful in military activities, being mindful in stock trading, being, it's like endless practically. And this kind of just this idea of being more aware, more alert, more present, that isn't really right mindfulness in and of itself. There needs to be the moral virtue, the understanding of karma and rebirth, the understanding of dangers of sense pleasures. So someone recently asked, like, with all this amazing amount of Dharma teachings that are out there online nowadays, what recommendations would I give for how to utilize that? And my first recommendation is that we should look for teachings that have a message of liberation and renunciation, so the dangers of sense pleasures, and really talk about karma and rebirth. So the context of the way the Buddha described the Dhamma and the reality of nature, how our actions have results, good actions, wholesome actions leading to good results, unwholesome actions leading to unwholesome, unpleasant results. All of this provides the proper context for mindfulness. And also included in this is an element of faith. So one of the things that can happen that I've read and heard people report on is that when they use mindfulness as a technique without the entirety of the Dhamma, they can sometimes get to that point where they see that they recognize the futility of seeking pleasure in the sense world, but they don't have the context of how to move through that phase of, kind of a shock or discomfort or even fear that can arise. Doesn't always happen that way. A lot of times when we have proper preparation, when we're taking the whole context of Dhamma in and we use mindfulness to a great degree, then when we have a realization like everything's falling apart, a lot of joy arises. But sometimes for some people, it can be a frightening experience. But that is something we move through to a deeper understanding of Dhamma. So this mindfulness that's correctly practiced, along with the other aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path, are this, it's this vehicle for awakening, moving in the direction of complete understanding of the way things actually are, complete letting go, complete happiness, contentment, relief. And so it's like as we use the practice, remembering to keep things in balance. Also with all the aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. So when we try to extract some piece for some kind of immediate goal, we may lose the plot and the real benefit. So another area of inquiry is when to use what foundation of mindfulness. I've heard some teachers talk about how you should stick with mindfulness of the body until you really get that completely clear, then move on to the feeling. And you can't get to Dhamma until after you've practiced for a very long time. I don't think that that's very helpful personally. I think it's important for us to become familiar with all four foundations and use them and see how to investigate the body, feeling, mind, and Dhamma. And then we gradually become more skilled and we become more susceptible to insight arising as we practice. It's that leads us on to deeper understanding of each of those four foundations. The practice can be really difficult, of course. It challenges us to look at the deepest fears we have and the greatest, you know, clinging and craving that we may have, um, these normal tendencies as human beings. And yet, through the practice, um, we can find the inspiration, um, the relief, the clarity that's needed to continue to really honestly work with whatever arises for us, to experience the fact that we can stay present and mindful with whatever comes in a way that we can outlast the waves of feeling. And if we can kind of develop that muscle, that ability to stay present, especially if we're observing feeling arising in the body, mental feeling as it presents itself in the body, then we can become confident that we can outlast any wave of fear, greed, hatred. Delusion is trickier, isn't it? Because we have to seek out the clues, the subtle cues that it's there. But that too can be uncovered, discovered, revealed, and dealt with. And each time we are able to stay present until the wave crests and falls again, and we see that it's a passing phenomenon, we become more confident that we don't have to be pushed around, pulled around by greed, hate, delusion, or fear, that we can remain stable in a kind of platform of mindfulness as we observe what's occurring, and building the case, the evidence that this is all passing phenomenon. It arises and it ceases. It's not going to last, regardless of what it is. But that the Dhamma is there, stable and secure. And that's the platform we can rest on. That's our refuge. So those are my thoughts on right mindfulness for the moment. And I'd really enjoy hearing what you have to say, your experience and your questions or other things, the things I left out, um, complaints. It's all open. So how do you usually do this part, Sangamita? Do people raise their hands or?
Well, yeah, we have more people than usual this morning. Normally it just people just speak out. If that gets complicated, then maybe they could wave and you could call their name, but we can try with just people we can start out with people just speaking out. So I've invited people to unmute themselves when they're ready to speak.
Great.
Hi, Ayya. The delusion part that you touched on, that's something that I've been really working on for a couple years with putting blind trust in some people that I felt were perhaps more advanced and conscious and on the path. And there's just a whole bunch of delusion and it really, it's very confusing. It's very confusing. So that's something that's challenging for me is to just, it's getting easier, more clear seeing.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I very much, I don't want to say tricked, but it was very, yeah, it was just deceiving. And so that's something that I'm definitely working on. If you have any more tips to kind of find those clues, but the intuition tells me more than ever, the more I follow the path, and I sit with myself and uncomfortable feelings that come up, and I don't mask them up. And so it's getting more clear, but that's something very, very huge that I've been working on.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big thing. And yeah, it's really good to remind ourselves and to remind one another that when we start to put people on pedestals, um, or then perhaps see ourselves on a pedestal, that's a dangerous position. It's important that we can, of course, respect and admire and appreciate the Dhamma that someone shares, and we always um, need to be, I think, alert to and observant of whether or not a person is living according to the Dhamma, who is teaching the Dhamma, and not to get too sort of caught up in idealizing them, to recognize that there probably is still greed, hatred, and delusion, and they're human beings that could do things that are not according to Dhamma, and it's so what you're talking about is really common. People will, instead of putting our faith in the Dhamma, we put our faith in people, and then we're really disappointed. Okay, I've seen a number of times where people are really, strongly dependent upon a monks or nuns, say, and then they disrobe, and people are really upset or feel let down. And I think that if we can kind of remind ourselves along the way to observe behavior, we have to observe people for a long time, the Buddha said, to know what's really there. And I was just reading in Stillness Flowing. I don't know if you know that book. It's the biography of Ajahn Chah. I found it really wonderful. It's a huge, thick book, but it's at the end, I'm sorry, it was over. It's like I actually turned around and started reading it again from the beginning. But there's a place where Ajahn Chah talked about how he examined his own mind thoroughly. It's something we need to do in ourselves as well. So this keeping an eye out for where greed, hatred, and delusion arise. And then the more, like what you're talking about, this development of, first of all, separating the people who present the Dhamma from the Dhamma itself, seeing that we can rely on the Dhamma. And even if something happens to the person who's, we've been looking to as a teacher, we're still safe. We're still able to access the Dhamma. It's not just through them. And then, recognizing that everyone in this world is suffering until they get to the point where they're arahants. There's suffering, and then we can begin to develop compassion for that. So when something, someone slips from the pedestal, we can actually, bring in the other the Brahma Viharas, the compassion and the equanimity. But this is something we can actually actively work on. That we can really keep this in mind as we look to teachers as we observe ourselves, to not get discouraged if we are not perfect, and it's okay. It's part of the process. Seeing delusion is challenging, but whenever we have this idea that someone is flawless, we're in delusion. People have this happen when they fall in love, right? They can't see anything wrong with this potential partner. Then delusion is present. And also the flip side, if we're really having trouble with someone and we cannot think of one good quality about them, we know delusion is present. And so these little hints that it's like, yeah, I need to. Can I turn and look, find a more balanced perspective? I hope that's useful, Kelly.
Yes, thank you very much. It's what introduced me into. I didn't know what a monk was 2 years ago. I had to look it up. I'm like, you sat with monks and blah, 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 and I had to look it up. But here I am, like, and
Yeah.
it's definitely seized a lot of dukkha that has come up in my life and my experiences. And the more that I sat with this man, and the more I continued to stay truthful to this practice, the more I was able to see his blind spots. And I didn't turn around and judge or label or anything like that. I was just like, it was just a huge insight. It was just like, whoa, okay, like, okay, I do still have this, but it was very like deceiving for quite a long time. So yeah, that's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, it's to know how people who are teaching Dhamma should behave is a good thing. To know how we should behave, that we should live according to the Dhamma, be honest about our defilements, and make every effort to correct them. And it's like one of the things that really helps monks and nuns stay on the rail is people knowing how we should behave. It's like, yeah, you have to do what we can to live up to that, practice what we preach. Otherwise, what good is it? So I'm glad that you're now at this point of seeing through it and seeing that the Dhamma is good. Sometimes the people who bring it to us, we have to recognize the limitations.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe I'll start stillness flowing.
Yay, you got it. Yeah, do start it.
So big. But yeah, maybe I'll start.
Don't be intimidated. It's
I won't.
Really cool. I mean, there are problems in every tradition with people who are, they get to a certain point of power or prestige and it's too much, or the defilements get cast as something other than they are. We know a nun who's advocating for some women who've run into sexual abuse with a monk in a different tradition from ours, and this happens. And the organization that was inviting him to teach was still, even though women were complaining, was still promoting him as a guru, as a teacher. And they would even say, oh, you have to think of this as a spiritual kind of experience or something. Really, really off. So we have to come back to the basic Dhamma, what the Buddha taught. This is not appropriate and damaging. And so It's something to be aware of and to support each other in seeing and understanding, so that it's not allowed to continue. It was years before, and it took the Indian government actually charging this person with sexual assault before the organization fessed up. And it's really, we must be more forthright and unwilling to accept that kind of abuse. So what does that have to do with mindfulness? Probably everything. Being mindful of what's really happening and willing to name it.
It seems to me, this is Marilyn speaking, it seems to me that the thing about delusion is that it's delusion and you don't see it.
Yeah.
And that part of the thing is to have more than one source, not just to have one teacher, but to have multiple inputs. And I find it really useful to rely on the Kalyanamita, to develop a group that's supportive, and I'm really grateful for a group that I'm in, which is really well informed and good. And we're all coming from different directions, and we don't try to teach each other. We just talk about where we think we had some kind of insight. And I find my first thought about delusion was some of them are deluded. And then I realized, but they're probably thinking that about me. And I need to be open to them telling me, oh, I think you're so slipped up here. I think there's a misunderstanding, you know? Mm-hmm. It's because I don't think you can actually see it yourself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, those are really good points. It's true. It's by its very nature, by its definition, it's difficult to see. And it's so true that it's relying on our Kalyanamita, our good friends, who, again, we observe their behavior over a long period. And whenever you get into a situation where the teacher says, you are not allowed to go to other teachers, you only can come here, that is, turn around and run. I think one of the things I really like about the training in the Ajahn Chah tradition is that monks and nuns are encouraged to have other teachers. After the first couple of years, they'll send the monk to a different monastery so he can experience a different teacher. And you know, it's really true that being in touch and of seeing how other people do it, and this is like, and coming and going from between groups helps to keep everything more transparent. And what you said is so important, that we are willing to listen to what other people see in us that we can't see. That's an incredible gift. The Buddha said that when someone will point out our flaws, of course, he also laid down some guidelines about how to do that. Make sure you're not doing the same thing you're pointing your finger at. Do it with kindness and a real wish to be supportive and so on. Be truthful, not have any ulterior motives. There's all kinds of things like that, but it's true. That's how we see our delusion. It's sometimes by looking at others. I liked your example. Sometimes when we see something in someone else, then we need to turn around and ask, where am I doing that? Am I doing that? And then sometimes we can really uncover some things that can help us move forward.
One of the big ones I find is this holding tight to views, thinking there's only one way to do this. And I think a lot of us want to find the one right way and don't want to entertain that, maybe there's something in the Mahayana tradition that will help or something like that. I'm not saying you should be leaping all over the place, but I think openness is a good thing. Maybe, yeah. But I really get stuck on my view. It's just so annoying how stuck I am.
Yeah. Well, being annoyed is probably a good sign. and then working through it. Yeah.
Marilyn, I know you touched on having, your, I don't know the Pali word, the good friends.
Kalyanamita, yeah.
Kalyanamita. But in my experience, this life, I reached a point where it was such adversity that I had to lose everything, all friends, all family, like everything, right? Like I was, when everything. And so then I had that blind faith in someone that I'm like, oh, I don't know what you're saying to me, but this is drawing to me to this, so to the path, right? But he would point out flaws, just like you were saying, point out all these flaws. And because I was in such a open idea, like pedestal type, I looked at myself for 2 years hard, and I did. I'm like, I looked at, and then I started seeing that he was doing what he was doing, pointing out stuff with me that I was looking at, but he was turning around and acting these things out on me. And it got to a point where I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, thank you so much for pointing this out to me, because I didn't have the Kalyan, like I didn't have anybody else to turn to except really Sangamita when I just met her, maybe 6 months into the past. And I found out about this and I started coming here, and I was in tears almost every time I come here and bawling and, so yeah, so thank you. It's so great to connect with people like this, because there's a point where I didn't know where to turn, right? And so I had that blind faith.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like Marilyn was saying, we want to think we've got the right view. We want to think we've got the right teacher. We want to think, we want to find that person who's got the answers that you can really depend on. And this is the thing we do in life, like over and over again. We want to find the thing. And there is no the thing in this world. It's the Dhamma, which is not among conditioned things. And so it's hard to learn how to find our way, how to depend upon ourselves. It's something we develop, and how to depend on and see who can we depend on and for what, how much. You know how it is with friends. Certain friends you can go to with certain things, and other things, they may have a blind spot there. You don't rely on them for that part. And yeah, this is about mindfulness, and in its own way, right? To be mindful and present, to be willing to see, this thing that I believed isn't quite correct, or this view I have is not completely correct, or I hadn't mentioned before, but this always having not just mindfulness but wisdom informing us about how to relate to what we're being mindful of. So in Pali, it's sati and sampajanya. It's this clear comprehension, having wisdom as we observe. It's a process. It's a process.
Hi, Ayya. It's Gabrielle, and I think where this conversation has led me is in regard to how I practice, and having multiple teachers helps sometimes, but I find it can be very confusing. The way you led us through the 4 foundations of mindfulness, I found very almost natural, and because I've heard that advice from teachers that you should stay with one aspect of that or one of the foundations until you've really got it. But I found, and so there's within me, there's like this intuitive way that I want to go about doing my practice, but I have doubts about, am I deluded? Am I will this really bring, take me along the path in a way that would be fruitful, I guess. So do you have any thoughts or any comments about how to trust myself or ourselves, and when we should be seeking guidance? That's a big question, a big
It
ask.
is, but I think you've got the intuition to figure that out yourself. But to just say, when we have the, we need to develop trust in ourselves as we go, just the way we develop trust in the Dhamma as we go. The Buddha, as you know, didn't ask us to take anything on blind faith. That our trust in the Dhamma comes, the way I often think of it for myself is kind of brick by brick. Like investigating something, learning, seeing that is how it works. And then when we do that for ourselves in our practice, so you try a practice and you see how it's working, and you recognize that you could be mistaken about something, and then you ask someone, get in touch with a teacher who's well respected, and you observe what they say, try it out. You take a step in one direction, you try it out, you see how it feels. Does it feel true? Does it feel like this is positive, bringing more peace? The basic criterion is, as the Buddha said, does this lead to more peace, or does this lead away from peace? And so it's like you test it, and of course some things you can't tell right away. It might get a little worse before it gets better, right? So you have to give it a fair enough try, and then you kind of test it, and then as you develop and you notice that your judgment has been pretty good, you start to develop some confidence in yourself and recognize that we're all different. We have different conditioning. We have different karma. We need to see what really is effective for us. And it's good to check things out with different teachers when you get the chance. So you've got me here. I'll be coming for a couple more times, and you can bring questions, and and then of course there are other teachers that are available, and really look to the ones who you see practicing renunciation, practicing humility, practicing being open and honest, and I find it has been useful to ask the same question of more than one teacher, and just not to criticize or, but to just kind of weigh what they say, see how what they say is true, where that might fit in your experience. And so the trust in yourself is something you can build gradually, and then it's pretty solid. Yes, Carson?
Thank you. With the coronavirus and just being able to meet on Zoom has been incredible. I mean, usually we'd have to, say, okay, I'm going to go to the Karuna Vihara for like a couple weeks to try to, see what they think about something. And instead we can tune in on Zoom. It's incredible. How it's really affected my practice, and I'm sure many other people to just have so much resource. How do you envision this going forward after the virus?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking about how to incorporate, Zoom along with in-house gatherings. And I don't quite know yet, but my sense is that for us, for example, our intention from before the time the pandemic started was that we want to establish a meditation center in town. We were in town in the heart of Silicon Valley before, and there are a lot of people who like to be able to easily drop in and get teachings. And then with the pandemic and our moving to the forest, things changed, but we intend to set up a meditation center in town. And so when we do, I'm hoping that we can find a way, if someone's willing to manage the technology for us, to include anyone who wants to join. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, we're about at the end of our time. So are there any last moment quick questions, or we'll end with the chant again? But is there anything else before we do our closing?
My name is Sharon, and I need to leave. I have another group starting at 10. This has been an awesome group to be with today. Thank you so much, Ayya and Sangamita, for putting this on. It's just been, and thank you everybody for your input. I hope to see you again. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, nice to have you join us, all of you.
What time is the sutta study on Wednesday?
7 p.m. Pacific time, 7 to 9. And we start with chanting. That's a pretty traditional program for us. We start with chanting and then we meditate, usually about 45 minutes. And sometimes it's guided and sometimes it's not. And then we have 1 hour of sutta study, one of the suttas, or sometimes a couple of short ones.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So lovely.
And you can join from our homepage. Like I said earlier, if you just use the link there, you don't have to have a password.
Okay, I'm just going to mute everybody temporarily. So if you can unmute, and we'll just end with our chant.
Samma ditti, samma sankappo, samma vaca, samma kammanto, samma jivo, samma vayamo, samma sati, samma samadhi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sangamita. It's been really lovely to join you.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
So
Sadhu.
those
Magic,
redwood
magic.
trees behind you.
Thank you.
I hope you have a
very much.
wonderful day and a really good month. And if all goes well, I'll see you again in about a month.
Yeah, in March. Thank you so much. This has
Yes.
been wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ayya. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Love you
Ayya,
all.
may I ask you a question? May I ask you a
Yeah.